news of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. And every week on this show, we uphold values that will never, ever die. And somebody needs our help this week, and that's Phil Robertson. He's the patriarch of the hit A&E show. It's a show on A&E. It's basically a reality TV show. It's called Duck Dynasty. He gave an interview to GQ magazine in which he essentially said that homosexuality is a sin, like other things are sinful. He was asked a direct question about it. He gave his opinion, and he has been suspended from the show. Even though it is the number one rated show in cable history, it's the number one nonfiction show in cable history, A&E has decided to suspend him. It's an outrage, and you have a petition out to get this reversed. You have a Facebook page created in support of him. So millions of his supporters and supporters of the show are rallying to him, as they should, because in this country, last I heard, we have something called freedom of speech. And we're all allowed to say whatever we want to say. And there shouldn't be such draconian repercussions just for saying something that for centuries has been upheld in this society and in societies around the entire world. It is not an unusual, outlandish, crazy thought to say that a particular sexual act like homosexuality, lesbianity, premarital sex, adultery, you name it, that it's sin. Christians have been saying that for centuries. And those who want to practice these behaviors grow up. We have something in this country called freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And we are going to uphold those values regardless of any of this nonsensical pressure that you try to put on us. And you know, I couldn't help but thinking this. We have a show on the airwaves, another reality TV show. It's called Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And in my view, this show is about a family that is utterly vile. You have Kim Kardashian, who came to fame for what reason? She basically did a sex tape with one of her boyfriends, and it went viral, and that's how she became famous. So there's a word for someone like her. It's called tramp. And her family is utterly vile. Her mother is an adulteress. She flirts with other men. You have one of her sisters, Chloe, who is now openly flirting with her other sister's love interest, which is absolutely sick. You have Kim Kardashian, who's involved in a 72-day marriage. This is somebody who has no talent except for being good looking, except for having prostituted her body. It is a vile, disgusting show, and yet you don't have Christians saying, you know what, we should get Keeping Up with the Kardashians off the air. We understand if you don't like the show, don't watch it. And on the other hand, you have a family, a Christian family, led by the patriarch like Phil Robertson. He dares to say what many Christians believe, and there's this draconian repercussion against him. It is outrageous. And I want to highlight the contrast between these two shows. Listen to what millions of people tune into on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Roll it, Brittany.
The most annoying children I've ever met in my entire life. Cut it out.
Did somebody take my underwear?
I did. I put them on because mine I peed on accident. I'm just feeling this. Like, my back is aching, my belt too tight, my hips are shaking from the left to the right, to the left, Mom. To the right. Mom. Try it. Oh my God. Literally. Right? I'm humiliated. I need to run out. I'm humiliated. You're basically a psycho and you're full of mood swings.
All right, we got the hormone patches
Okay,
here.
we have to, don't touch it, because you have to put it on a fatty part of your body. Anywhere. Ow! These need to be right here. Thank you. Thank you.
This is the idiocy that is called Keeping Up with the Kardashians. This is a grotesque, sick, stupid show. And if Mr. Phil Robertson is going to be suspended, well, I want the whole Kardashian clan suspended for offending me every week. By contrast, let's just compare the two shows. Now listen to a little segment from Duck Dynasty. Roll it, Brittany.
We're going to offer a prayer for the folks in Oklahoma who just went through the massive tornado. Please bow. Father, the storms in the atmosphere, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, they're part of our stay while we're on the earth. We see them and we realize there's something always bigger than us. Things we hide from, try to find shelter from. And with that, Father, also the storms of life come our way. Mistakes we make, bad decisions, hurt, and all of us and our sins. At the end of the day, Father, we are but a vapor. We appear for a little while, and then we meet you. Some go early, and some go later. So, Father, through it all, I pray, Father, in the end, all we have, the only hope we have, is you. So, Father, we believe in you. We trust you. I pray, Father, for the ones who have left this earth earlier than we all wanted. I pray, Father, that they're in your arms and they are comforted. While we're here, I do pray, Father, we be aware of how short and tenuous life itself is.
So essentially, that's the man that we prosecute nowadays. The Kardashians are fine. Patriarch Phil Robertson, a man of faith, a man whose words are so thoughtful of others, a man that grasps the limitations of himself, of his family, and of the frailty of life on earth. All of this wisdom, no, not good enough. Not good enough. But someone like the Kardashians, they're just fine, according to modern day America. Well, I say this. If you suspend Phil Robertson, I want the whole Kardashian clan also suspended. Or let's do the reverse. If they have the right to freedom of expression and freedom of speech, then so do we Christians. It's as simple as that. We will return to this story later on in the show. I also want to address in this segment lots of news this week regarding the NSA. And 60 Minutes did a segment where they actually took the audience deep within the NSA. And one of its leading directors, General Keith Alexander, he tried to whitewash the actions of the NSA. Roll it, Brittany.
The fact is, we're not collecting everybody's email. We're not collecting everybody's phone things. We're not listening to that. Our job is foreign intelligence, and we're very good at that.
You know, that is a bunch of garbage. We know that everywhere we turn, our rights are being abrogated. A&E is abrogating the rights of Christians to speak freely. And we know that the NSA is watching and surveilling us. They have a huge database of all our phone records, and they are also surveilling our emails, according to the testimony of whistleblower Edward Snowden. So Keith Alexander and his crew basically lied to 60 Minutes, and those who were conducting the interview did a horrible job. The 60 Minutes interview has been criticized roundly. Yet during that interview, there was an interesting proposition. One individual who was interviewed, an NSA director, even suggested that perhaps Edward Snowden could be given amnesty. Roll it, Brittany.
He's already said, if I got amnesty, I would come back. Given the potential damage to national security, what would your thought on making a deal be?
So my personal view is, yes, it's worth having a conversation about. I would need assurances that the remainder of the data could be secured, and my bar for those assurances would be very high. It would be more than just an assertion on his part.
Well, that was a leading NSA director saying that perhaps they could give Edward Snowden amnesty, but in response or in return for that amnesty, he would have to obviously give back or return all of the classified documents that he stole. They did say in that interview that he has some extremely damaging information that would indeed damage national security beyond the information that he's already revealed, that he does have extensive information that our enemies could use against the United States. We know that so far Edward Snowden has upheld his bargain with the American people in that he has not leaked information that is actually damaging our national security. All that he has done is helped Americans better understand that the government is spying on us, that our government is spying on us, that we need protections, great protections against a state that obviously does not know its limits. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that will never, ever die.
Stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Settle down, it'll all be clear. Don't pay no mind to the demons, they fill you with fear. Trouble in might drag you down.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, and we had to play one of my all-time favorite songs to introduce one of my all-time favorite people as our next guest. This is a fearless man. He is a best-selling author, a senior pastor, a former law enforcement officer. He has outstanding investigative skills. He is a veteran talk radio host. He's a writer. He's a columnist. He's appeared on countless television and radio programs. He is a communicator par excellence. He is what I call a Renaissance man. But most of all, he is my very dear friend and my comrade against this liberal regime. This is Carl Gallups. Welcome, Carl.
Dr. Grace, thank you so much for having me on. Hey, listen, with that introduction, I demand a raise.
Well, that is Preacher C, right?
That's Preacher C, Preacher C. I tell you what, I didn't know I was all that. Man, that's pretty impressive, but thank you. God bless you, Dr. Grace.
Oh, isn't it fun when somebody reads your bio? It always puts you in a good
mood.
You forget how much you've done.
I know. Well, when you're as old as I am, I mean, you're bound to have done 2 or 3 things anyway.
Well, Carl, I absolutely love how courageously you uphold Christian principles. I mean, right there on your website, we have this statement. Let me read it. My life is based upon a distinctly biblical worldview. I do not apologize for that worldview. And that really summarizes Carl Gallups in a nutshell. He is a best-selling author of 2 books that I think really really do wonders for Christianity. The first is The Magic Man in the Sky. That was the best-selling book. And now he's out with another book that I found mesmerizing. It is called The Rabbi Who Found Messiah, the story of Yitzhak Kaduri and his prophecies of the end time. Carl, can you tell me, why should anybody read this book? What is fascinating about this story?
Well, I appreciate it. There are many things fascinating about the story. This is a story that the media, especially in Israel and Europe and even in the United States, shut down some years ago and has covered up. Because the story is so profound, it was so shocking. It shook the foundations of the religious world, particularly the Orthodox Jewish world, as well as the Christian world. And it is still unfolding because it has connections to an amazing event that's going on. So I can give you the story in a quick nutshell, and then we can get into all the details of it. But the bottom line, it involves Rabbi Yitzhak Kaduri, 108 years old when he died in 2006, Israel's most revered and famous rabbi in modern Israel's history. But just before he died, he said two amazing things, Dr. Grace. He said that he had a vision of the real Messiah. The Messiah had come to him, and he knew the name of the Messiah, and he was putting that name in a note to be opened 1 year after his death. And then he also said that it had been revealed to him that Messiah would not reveal himself, would not come until after Ariel Sharon had died. Now, he said those things in the fall of 2005. And within a few weeks, by January of 2006, Ariel Sharon, who was Israel's 11th prime minister at the time, he had a stroke and went into a coma.
That's right. And Ariel Sharon is still in a vegetative state.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. Grace. Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. 7 years later, Dr. Grace, he's still in a coma, still today. As a matter of fact, this year, in January, Fox News ran a big special on it that he was, some brainwave test had been done on him, and it looked like that he was responding appropriately to various stimuli. And
that's right. And in the world of Orthodox Judaism, there's a conviction that a curse of some kind was placed on him by the leaders of Orthodox Judaism, who were really upset at him for basically giving away the Gaza Strip.
Yes, that happened in August of 2005, just before Kaduri made his pronouncement. It's called the Pulsa de Nura, which is Hebrew meaning lashings of fire. It's a Kabbalistic curse, and it was put on him by a group of Kabbalistic rabbis, and it basically calls for his suffering and eventual death. And the curse was put on him because of his involvement in the Land for Peace giveaway deal with the Gaza Strip.
Right, and so let's return to Kaduri. So Kaduri had a vision,
right.
And then after his death, a year later, there was going to be the moment where a note that he had left behind would be opened, and
right.
It would be revealed who the Messiah is.
Right. That's exactly right. So he made those pronouncements in fall of 2005. In the early January of 2006, Ariel Sharon went into a coma, and just a few weeks later, still in January of 2006, Yitzhak Kaduri died. And so all of this happened just within weeks, his pronouncement, and then the coma, and then Kaduri's death. And so a year later, 2007, the beginning of 2007, March, April of 2007, Israel Today and News First Class, both of these are Israeli publications right out of Jerusalem, right out of Israel. They ran stories about this death note, this Messiah note, was posted on Yitzhak Kaduri's own website, kaduri.net. And the note was revealed, and this is the note that shook Orthodox Judaism to the core. Once the note was decoded and once they figured out what it literally was saying, the note was pulled from the website. The media refused to report on it anymore, and Kaduri's people, the heir apparents of his ministry organization, began to claim that the note was a forgery, a fake, a hoax. Well, the problem with that is the note was put on Kaduri's own website and was backed up by several of Kaduri's followers who said this was his note, this was authentic, this was his handwriting. And And this is what he revealed. Now, do you want me to tell you what was in the note, Dr. Grace?
Oh, I know what was in the note. I want the audience to hear the shocking results of what was in the note. Go ahead, Carl.
I know you've read the book, so you know. But here's what happened. The note was put on the website, and it was written in Hebrew, of course, and translated to English. The note just simply said a phrase that sounds very messianic. It sounds very Old Testament-ish, if you will. And it simply said this: concerning the letter abbreviation of his name, comma, he shall lift his people and prove that the word and the law are valid. Now, that's all the note said in its translation. If you were reading it in English, that's what it would say. Well, as you know, that note doesn't give the name of the Messiah. It's just a phrase about Messiah's attributes. He will lift his people. He will prove that the word and the law are valid. But here's the deal, Dr. Grace. People knew that he said he was leaving the name in a note. Well, when they went back and read that first part of the sentence, it says, concerning the letter abbreviation of his name. And a light bulb kicked on in people's head. They said, oh my gosh, he has left a coded message for us, which is not unusual for Rabbi Kaduri to do those kinds of things. And they said, so after that comma, look at the rest of the sentence. He shall lift his people and prove that the word and the law are valid. Now, that English phrase comes from 6 Hebrew words, Dr. Grace, as you know. And so they took the first letter of each of those 6 Hebrew words, because that's what the instruction said, the letter abbreviation of his name. And then, my goodness, the first letter of each of those Hebrew words spelled a beautiful, perfect Hebrew name. And the name that he left as the name of the Messiah was, in Hebrew, Yehoshua, which is the long version of Yeshua, which is the Hebrew word translated to Greek, or the Romanized Greek, which was in the New Testament, to Iesus, which is translated to English as Jesus. So, in other words, that note, if it was Rabbi Kaduri's note, and it was on his website, and he proclaimed that he was putting one there, or that one would be put there, the note literally said that the name of the Messiah was Jesus. And once that was discovered, that was the name he left, the note was pulled, and his organization went into denial mode and began to put out press reports and videos and everything else.
Right, and I thought you had a really interesting phrase in the book and also in the DVD that accompanies the book. There's a movie, by the way, for all you folks out there interested in this story that Carl Gallups was a part of. It's a documentary DVD. Essentially, you said that would be like Reverend Graham pronouncing that Muhammad is the Messiah, right? That's the equivalent of what this amounts to. So you have a revered leader of an Orthodox Jewish sect saying that the Messiah is none other than Jesus Christ himself.
Well, I mean, that's certainly what it appears, and you're right. I do say that in the book and the movie, because that is what it would be like. It would be like if Billy Graham passed and a year later somebody opened a note wherein he said, look, just before I died, I met the real Messiah, and his name is Muhammad. Because Orthodox Jews, rabbinical Jews, do not even mention the name of Jesus Christ is anathema to them, and the New Testament scriptures are anathema. The Christian message is prohibited. It's completely anathema. So for the most revered, listen, when this guy died, Dr. Grace, in 2006, 300,000 people came to his funeral. They had to close the streets of Jerusalem down for 2 days.
Yeah, so what are his followers saying now? Is there a deep division between those who are still followers of him and those who denounce him? Where are we now?
Yeah, well, here's where we are now. Those who are deep, deep followers of his, many of them, I suppose, don't know the depth of the story that you and I know, because the media shut it down. But now, of course, this book and this DVD is opening the story back up. But those that are closest to Kaduri and those that know about the story, those that are deeply Orthodox, they are doing their best to, A, continue to cover the story up, or B, to proclaim that the note was a hoax. And I deal with that in my book, as you know. I mean, I discussed that possibility. It's possible that the note is not real, but the problem with that, though, Dr. Grace, and again, I was in law enforcement. My investigative mind kicks in. The problem with proclaiming it's not real is they've gone to such great lengths to to decry this note, his son, David Kaduri, has said, well, my father never even talked about the Messiah. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course he did. It was in all the Israeli media for years that he kept proclaiming that he had met the Messiah and he knew the Messiah. Not only that, but followers of his ministry were talking about this note. And not only that, the note was put on his website until they decoded it. So not only that, we have video, as you've seen the movie, of students from his rabbinical school who said not only did he write the note, but he was talking about Yeshua in his rabbinical school for some time before he died. So the evidence seems to suggest, Dr. Grace, that he did write this note. It was put on the website as his note, but once they discovered what it was, they freaked out.
Right.
And
now, we'd have to ask this question, though. Why would a man who had had a vision of the Messiah proceed in this manner? Why wouldn't he simply announce what he had seen during his lifetime rather than leave all these questions percolating right now?
You know what? That's an excellent question. A lot of people ask me that. And the only answer that I can give, of course, I don't know the exact answer, but I can speculate. Considering the outrage that took place once the note was put up and decoded, considering 7 years later the outrage that still takes place, the outrage over this book and movie being produced to get the story out again, I imagine that he knew that this kind of outrage would ensue. And I imagine he knew what it would do to his legacy and to his ministry. But, you know, it's like the Apostle Paul. I mean, this should not surprise us, Dr. Grace. The Apostle Paul was a Jew. He was a Pharisee. He was a rabbi. He was on his way to destroy the Christian church and to put Christians in prison when he met the resurrected Christ, totally changed his life, and for the rest of his life, the Apostle Paul was pursued, he was stoned, he was beaten, he was in prison, he was lied about, he was trashed, he was beat up, attempted murder, until finally his head was cut off by a Roman emperor. So I think Rabbi Kaduri more than likely knew he was 108. He was on his way out. Maybe this was the instruction the Lord gave him himself. I don't know. We can only speculate.
Right. What is the importance that this particular book has for Christians? You know, the audience of American Heartland, lots of folks out there who listen to this show are deep, pious Christians. Why would you say it's important for them to become really familiar with this story to read the book?
Well, for a lot of reasons, Dr. Grace, and thank you for asking me that. Number one, they just need to know this story. It's an exciting story of prophecy in these last days in which we're living, these prophetic days in which we're living. If this man had an encounter like the Apostle Paul, then this is profoundly important. Plus, Ariel Sharon is still alive, and if truly this revelation was given to him from the Lord, this is something that we should be attuned to. Secondly, Christians, I think, would find the book extremely helpful and interesting because not only do I do a journalistic approach to reporting of this story that the media has covered up, but I also do a lot, as you know, I do a lot of biblical exploration. I do a lot of historical understanding of the Jewish mindset, the Jewish understanding of Messiah, the two Messiahs they're looking for. I go into great depth and detail of Israeli history, of Zionism, of the understanding of the practice of Kabbalah, which Rabbi Kaduri was involved in. A lot of Hollywood stars are involved in it. This is the kind of book you can put on your shelf and refer back to over and over for years, regardless of the crux story, which revolves around this rabbi's prophecy.
Right. What a remarkable story. I think that any Christian who reads it would be encouraged by, it's almost like a miraculous event, a revered rabbi who comes to know Jesus and who essentially tells his flock a year after his death through this encrypted note that the Messiah is actually Jesus. I mean, you know, Carl, I never heard of this story before you told me about it, so I think you're doing a remarkable service. It certainly has been buried, and it's one of those stories where I think Christians will gravitate to it with great hope and thanksgiving because we see the Lord working in miraculous and mysterious ways around the world. And our media, our American media, isn't reporting on such a remarkable, outstanding event.
Right. And Dr. Grace, think of this. I thought of this answer to your question a moment ago about why do it this way. Well, what a brilliant way. What if he really had a vision of Christ? What if he really knows these things? I mean, you and I are biblical Christians. We believe that he got the name of the Messiah right. He risked his entire legacy to put this out there. But think about it. Had he proclaimed this while he was still alive at 108, people would have dismissed it as just a dawdling old man who had lost his mind, and it would have been buried. But by leaving it in a note to be exposed a year later, and now a book and a movie being written about it 7 years later, Kaduri's message continues to be preached all over the world. So
wow.
This may be just from the hand of God.
Right. What a remarkable story. We need to take a break, and Carl, we'd love to pick your brain on a number of other stories. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, and I am upholding values that will never, ever die.
Strong wind of promise that will blow away all the doubt and fear if I can dream.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, and today we have a special guest, the host of Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, and the best-selling author of The Magic Man in the Sky and his latest book, The Rabbi Who Found Messiah. This is one of the most fearless men on radio. He is Carl Gallups. Carl, thanks for staying with us for another segment. We are fascinated today by the tremendous controversy as a result of the statements made by Phil Robertson, the Patriarch of Duck Dynasty. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, bless his heart. You know, I read all of the statements he said, and he spoke very anatomically correct and physiologically correct with medical language, and then he spoke words from the Scripture, and then he spoke historically and socially accurate truths. The bottom line, what I'm getting to, Dr. Grace, is that everything Phil said was truth. And not only Christian truth, because when he, of course, read from the Scriptures, I mean, I would just say that is as much truth as you can get. But he just spoke medically truthfully. He spoke psychologically truthfully, socially truthfully, historically truthfully. And the media castigated him, calling him vile and a liar, and I mean all of these filthy names and degrading him. And I found it interesting. Never did they address anything he said. They just called him a bunch of names.
That's completely right. I mean, GLAAD basically said, quote, "This is some of the vilest and most extreme statements uttered against LGBT people in a mainstream publication." What are they talking about?
I don't know. That's the point. I mean, I would say if I was on the air with them, I would say, okay, I'll give you that. Please tell me what was the most vile thing that he said. Please tell me. What was it?
Well, they're trying to suggest that he compared homosexual behavior to bestiality, but he didn't do that.
No, he did not.
What he said was that there is homosexual behavior is sinful, just like other things. Essentially, he was saying it's just like other things are sinful in his view, like bestiality, like sleeping around with this woman and that woman. So by this logic, by their logic, he's also saying that promiscuity is a form of bestiality, but he's not saying that.
Exactly.
So even heterosexuals should be just as outraged as homosexuals by their logic, by their twisted logic.
Right. You would think so. And their logic is twisted, and there's a biblical reason for their twisted logic. But Dr. Grace, listen, here, look, watch this. Several years ago, I've been in talk radio, I guess, for 12 years now, so maybe a decade ago, when we were just on the forefront of the possibility of this radical homosexual movement gripping our nation, and on the possibility of homosexual marriage and legitimization of homosexual relationships, I said way back then, I said, look, if you take their logic, if you take this radical homosexual agenda's logic in defending this, and if our culture lets this logic take us to legitimizing homosexual marriage, then here's what's going to happen. Right behind it will be attempts to legitimize pedophilia. Right behind it will be attempts to legitimize polygamy. Now, when I said that years ago, oh my gosh, Dr. Grace, you know, on a much smaller scale, I was attacked like Phil has been in these last couple of days. Oh, I was called vile and right-wing and a fundamental preacher and an idiot and a liar and all of these names. But here we are, all of these years later, homosexuality is being legitimized state after state after state, nation after nation after nation, and guess what happened? Now, in the headline news around the world and in America, there are movements, active movements to legitimize pedophilia and polygamy, and there's even talk of legitimizing bestiality. And by the same logic that the radical homosexual movement is using.
That is correct. And I remember saying years ago that it wasn't tolerance that gays and lesbians wanted. They don't want tolerance. Even now, there's plenty of tolerance for their lifestyle. What they want is to be considered legitimate. What they want is they want to eradicate Christian thought. They want to eradicate the very categories of good and evil, virtue and sin.
And that, listen, Dr. Grace, you absolutely nailed it. That is what it's all about. It's not about equal rights. It is about the legitimization of what's going on in their heart and in their soul, and they want to. It is about the destruction of the Christian worldview and the foundation of our very nation and society.
Absolutely. And one of the GLAAD spokespersons, this person, Wilson Cruz, he actually says, quote, Phil and his family claim to be Christian, but Phil's lies about an entire community fly in the face of what true Christians believe. Right. I don't know which true Christian this man, Wilson Cruz, is talking about, because true Christians understand that there's a category called sin that many of us belong to here. Case in point, I raise my hand. Sinner, I'm one. Are you, Carl?
Oh, yes. Saved by grace. Praise God.
Yes. I mean, there's lots of categories, lots of things that Christians claim to be, say outright, are sinful, such as premarital sex, adultery, looking at a woman lustfully if you're married, even that, pornography. I mean, we can go on, and it's not just the sexual sins, the sin of pride, the sin of anger, the sin of hate, the sin of vanity, the sin of greed. There's so many categories of sin, and you as a preacher know that. You talk about it every Sunday.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you know what? Let me just bring it down to the basest level. Now, I'm going to use very, very gracious and clean language here, but let me bring it to the basest level, and then I want to tell you in your audience what the Center for Disease Control says about this. But the basest level of this whole argument, GLAAD and the radical homosexual movement tries to make it about equal rights and we were born this way and this and that. No, here's what it's about. It's about the way in which a person chooses to have sex with another person, and they want you and me to like it and to celebrate it publicly.
That is exactly right. And one of the things I've said many times is that there is a play on language, like you saying the word lesbian or homosexual, rather than talking clearly about the specific sexual act. Because, as you and I know, sodomy is an act that even men and women can engage in, and in fact are engaging in. And it's just as sinful if a man and a woman does it as if two men do it.
Yes.
Because it is a desecration of the body. And you know what? They can say till they're blue in the face that it's legitimate and blah, blah, blah. But every single, and you know this even better than I do, every world religion in the history of the world has called this sin.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. It's an aberration of cultural norms for the last 6,000 to 10,000 years. Now, homosexuality has been around, we know, almost from the beginning of time, from the days of Noah, apparently. But when a culture, see, a culture does not fall apart because homosexuality exists within it. But where a culture starts falling apart is when a culture embraces that lifestyle, legitimizes it, and calls it normal, and then celebrates it. That's when the culture begins to fall apart.
Bingo. And that is a very brilliant and perceptive point. Carl, I want to ask you, when you preach on Sundays and when you address these very sensitive sexual issues, what does your congregation say? How do they react?
Well, first of all, I've been the pastor of this one church for 27 years, so I've proven my integrity to them. I preach the whole Word of God, the whole counsel of God. I don't dance around issues, but I'm also aware that there are everywhere from small children to senior adults and everybody in between. But because our people, for the most part, are very biblically literate, they get it, they understand it. I can use some code words that little children can't understand, and the adults and the teenagers get it, and they appreciate the fact that I preach the whole Word. Now, for your audience, and I know you know this about me, Dr. Grace, but your audience may not. Listen, I don't get up in the pulpit and bash homosexuals. I do speak against the sin of homosexuality, and that's two different things. I can speak against drunkenness but still love the drunkard and still minister to the drunkard. I can speak against drug abuse but still love the person who's hooked on drugs and immerse my life into trying to help them come out of that. It's the same thing with homosexuality. The doors of my church are open to any practicing homosexual who wants to come into a worship service because they're seeking God and they're trying to come out of what the Bible calls their sin, and the Bible calls it perversion.
Yes,
my arms
indeed.
are open. Yeah, my arms are open and the church doors are open.
Exactly. And then in a larger point outside of the church, we have the right in this country to speak our minds and not suffer retaliation. It's called free speech.
Yes, especially when you're speaking truth. And let me just tell you, the Center for Disease Control, a government website, it has a whole page dedicated to the devastating health effects of, guess what? Man-on-man sex, especially male-on-male sex, but female-on-female as well. But they talk about the devastating statistics, and I don't remember the numbers now, so I'm not going to try to quote them because I don't want to mislead anybody, but they can check this out. We've written article after article on P.P. Simmons' News and Ministry site about it. Right from the Center for Disease Control site, the chances of, the spread and proliferation of AIDS in the homosexual community is outrageous. The proliferation of sexually transmitted diseases, other sexually transmitted diseases, is outrageous. The long-term psychological effects, the long-term relationship effects, the statistics show that most homosexuals have many more sex partners than heterosexuals do. And this is from the government website. It's not just some Baptist preacher spouting off on the radio.
Oh, well, you know what? They're gonna have to scrub that now that you point everybody's attention to it, Carl.
well, maybe so, but I'm just saying. I mean, we've got copies of it, and we've got links to it, and, of course, there's always the Wayback Machine. They can't get around that. So.
Right on. Well, Carl, listen, your perspective is always so refreshing, so brilliant, so profound. Tell our audience where they can get your books, the latest DVD, where they can listen to you every week.
Thank you, Dr. Grace. You're so kind. Well, two things. To get the book and the DVD and all of that, in fact, both books I've written, you can get them at Amazon or any good bookstore anywhere in the United States. And then you can go to my website, carlgallups.com, CarlGallups, carlgallups.com, and find out everything about me, my radio program, links, podcasts, videos I produce, P.P. Simmons News and Ministry site, my books, DVDs. It's all there at carlgallups.com.
Oh, thank you so much, Carl. You heard it for yourself, American Heartland. This is a fearless man, a man of God, a man of wisdom, a man of learning. Check out his two books, The Magic Man in the Sky, and the latest, amazing, outstanding story, The Rabbi Who Found Messiah. That also comes with the DVD, or there's a DVD out there to be purchased too. So check it out, read it. Put it as a great Christmas gift for family and friends. You won't regret it. You're listening to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. We are here upholding values that will never die.
And see the way our future shines. God must really love me. When I look at the miracles around me, at the dream that I live and the gifts that He gives.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
I saw the life inside.
to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. We are always upholding values that never die on this show, even when those values are under attack, even when those values are not popular, as you heard in the last segments with Carl Gallups. Well, I was really intrigued this week, once again, by Barbara Walters. This week, she revealed her list of the 10 most fascinating people. And in that broadcast, she also did a little bit of a retrospective of the fascinating people that she has chosen since 1993. What I found most stunning when you actually go back in time with her, you realize that so many of the people that she chose, they seem to be formidable, and that their reputation has suffered badly since they were chosen in their heyday. She did discuss, there were little snippets of, she had chosen Tom Cruise at one point. Obviously, his star has fallen quite a bit. She had chosen Tiger Woods, who was embroiled in scandal over the last couple of years. She had, those are just a whole bunch of folks that, looking back in time, they seemed either irrelevant or they seemed to be much, much, much diminished. And one of the things I couldn't help thinking was, her judgment is really poor. You would think that if you're looking back over your career, you could look back with pride and say that the people that I chose turned out to be truly remarkable, not just for 15 minutes, but for decades and decades, and that their fame, was really merited, that there was some substance to why she would choose whoever it is that she chose. Well, you recall that a couple of weeks ago, we did an extensive analysis on this show of Barbara Walters humiliating President Barack Obama and the First Lady. And one of the things I said is, it's very obvious that Barbara Walters is one of those people who, during the 2008 campaign, really preferred Hillary Clinton. And she took the opportunity to stick it to Obama. And she definitely did so with this list, too. Because guess who is Barbara Walters' number one most fascinating person? It's none other than Hillary Clinton, of all people. Now, I've got to say something about Hillary Clinton. She's not fascinating in 2013. She's a footnote at best. So why does Barbara Walters want to make her the most fascinating person in America for the year 2013? Only to do two things. Number one, she wants to continue to undermine President Barack Obama, and she wants to plug Hillary for 2016. She's basically signaling to her fellow Democratic journalists and friends that, you know what, let's move on from this administration. Let's look ahead to the next president, the one who can maybe truly do something great from their Democratic perspective. Let's focus on Hillary Clinton, because clearly Hillary Clinton doesn't deserve to be number one on that list. And you can see very clearly what she's doing by the question she asked on the broadcast. Roll it, Brittany.
Okay, here it comes. When will you, if you do, decide whether or not you're going to run for president?
Well, it's such a difficult decision, and it's one that I am not going to rush into. And I don't think we should be looking at the next election. I think we should be looking at the work that we have today. Our unemployment rate is still too high. We have people getting kicked off of food stamps who are in terrible economic straits, small businesses not getting credit. I could go on and on. So I think we ought to pay attention to what's happening right now.
I have to push for the answer about whether or not you might run for president.
I haven't made up my mind.
Really haven't?
Really have not. I will look carefully at what I think I can do and make that decision, sometime next year.
Does your husband want you to run?
He is very respectful. He knows that this is...
He does want you to run.
Well, he wants me to do what I think is right.
Well, this was a really fluff interview. Everybody knows that Hillary Clinton wants to be president of the United States. Everybody knows she's going to run in 2016. Everybody knows that Bill Clinton wants Hillary Clinton to run for office. That's why they're together. Their marriage is a sham by many reports. The only thing that binds them is this commitment to political power that they both deeply share. So Barbara Walters basically did a puff piece on Hillary Clinton, but it was part of her agenda to stick the knife in President Barack Obama, and also to try to put forward a female. She sees herself, Barbara Walters does, as a pioneer in journalism, and she wanted to help to launch the first female president. She wants to be able to say, looking back, that she was a key part of helping to give Hillary Clinton legs, that is media legs, by naming her, putting her on the list of the 10 most fascinating people. Barbara Walters is going to retire next year in 2014, so she really wanted this to make a statement, a lasting statement for Hillary Clinton and for herself, too, as a female. Now, I thought that Hillary Clinton, at one point during that interview, she was suggesting, check this out, you men out there are especially going to find this funny, that, perhaps female leaders are better at coming up with a consensus than male leaders. Perhaps a woman is more particularly suited to a time of gridlock like the age in which we now live. And she referenced female senators working today that are making a difference in terms of being able to achieve consensus. Now, those of you who have wives, sisters, sister-in-laws, mothers, basically all of you out there, you know that that's one big lie. Women have no special virtue at consensus making. I have to say, from my own personal life experience, I've had male bosses, I've had female bosses. And I can tell you this, when somebody is rotten, they're rotten whether they're male or female, and equally so. So I don't think there's any special virtue. I've observed women in the workplace. I think some of them have been just as cantankerous, just as impossible as the men out there. And I hope that Hillary Clinton doesn't think she's going to get any momentum from this crazy idea that women can somehow make a difference in Washington, D.C. It has nothing to do with gender. The gridlock that we face is ideological. We are in the middle of a culture war. We are in the middle of a deep divide in our nation between those who value liberty and those who prefer a big government, progressive agenda to individual liberty. That's what's at stake here. And there are men and women on both sides of this divide. And that gridlock will occur regardless of whether or not you have a male or a female leading us. What I find particularly intriguing this week is that Barbara Walters not only put Hillary Clinton at the top of her list, giving her a tremendous amount of media play, but on Piers Morgan, she also took more swipes at President Barack Obama. Roll it, Brittany.
You have interviewed every president of my lifetime. Why is Obama facing so much opposition now? Why is he struggling so much to really fulfill the great flame of ambition and excitement that he was elected on originally in 2009?
Well, you've touched on it to a degree. He made so many promises. We thought that he was going to be, I shouldn't say this at Christmas time, but the next Messiah. And the whole Obamacare, or whatever you want to call that, a formidable, affordable health act, it just hasn't worked for him. And he's stumbled around on it. And people feel very disappointed because they expected more. It's very difficult when the expectations for you are very high. You're almost better off when they're low and then they rise and rise. His were very high and they've dropped. But, he still has several years to go.
She says that it's unfortunate that the expectations were high. Well, who contributed to those high expectations? It was the liberal media that contributed to those high expectations. Who contributed to this insane idea that he could be some kind of a quote-unquote Messiah? I can tell you this, certainly nobody on the right thought that that's what was going to happen. Those of us on the right were decrying this man as somebody who was inexperienced, who was going to be in over his head, and who ultimately had deep socialistic roots that the mainstream media wasn't adequately addressing. So who contributed to the high expectations? People like you did, Barbara Walters. And there she is saying that people thought he was going to be some kind of a Messiah. No, I never thought he was going to be a Messiah. You had many, many, many people who believed in President Barack Obama because you folks like Barbara Walters, didn't do your job properly. And you know what I want to hear? I want to hear an apology. You didn't vet this man. You are a noted journalist. You did nothing to vet him. You did nothing to expose him. You did nothing to warn the people. So don't sit there now on your high horse telling us that he's incompetent, that he hasn't risen to our expectations, that Obamacare is a failure. You're partially responsible for that. You and the rest of your sycophantic, silly media that celebrated him, that put him on your shoulders, and that ensured he won not just one election, but 2 elections. So what do we think now about your work when you are trying to advance the election of Hillary Clinton? We know that your grasp of Hillary Clinton is just as shoddy, just as shallow as your previous grasp of the president was. So as far as I'm concerned, you have no credibility whatsoever. So don't sit there now and talk about the failures of President Obama. Don't sit there humiliating him when you're also part of this huge debacle of a failed presidency. You and all your like. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com. And although we're very annoyed at Barbara Walters, we do want to wish you all a very, very, very Merry, Merry Christmas from all of us to all of you with all our heart. God bless you and God bless this great United States of America.
An extraordinary place where the stars and stripes and the eagle fly.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.